Hello, everyone. This is Dan Fionescu, and we will go through Chapter 4 for Week 4 regarding stakeholders and issue analysis. So we're going to go through some of the learning objectives. So explain stakeholders analysis in an organization, describe the stakeholders management capability, describe the stakeholders management matrix and understand that matrix mapping, discussing the diagnosis typology of organizational stakeholders, and looking at identify the stakeholders and the salience typology, explain the applications of stakeholders, influence strategies, and identify the use of stakeholders collaboration approaches. Learn about approaches to issue analysis. Like we've heard and seen into the previous chapters, stakeholders can be a group or an individual that are working within a corporation, or they are external, depending on various classification and categorization as external or internal, and in the same time primary or secondary. But even if we are talking about the stakeholders, internal or external, there should be an engagement. So that means there is a cooperation, there is an agreement on a corporation level to understand and involve the relevant individuals, groups, or organizations by considering their moral concerns. So the issue analysis, it means a transposure of an effort to understand the source, the nature, and extent of a question or matter in the dispute facing corporation, will result in addressing or resolving the matter. And usually a stakeholder analysis, it is a basic and a traditional approach, whereas corporation can increase understanding of stakeholders by asking the following questions. Who are our stakeholders? What are their stakes? What's in it for me from the perspective of the stakeholders? What opportunities and challenges are presented to our firm? What responsibility does our firm have to all its stakeholders? What strategies or actions should our firm use to deal with the stakeholders' challenges and opportunities? So irrespective if we're talking about the stakeholders, which can be shareholders, which can be internal or external partners, vendors, customers, and whatnot, internal employees, we have to consider the stakeholders management capability, which is the ability of the managers of that department or of that organization to identify the stakeholders and their influences, to develop the organizational practices, to understand the stakeholders, and as well to interact in a direct or indirect mode and undertake responsibility of contacting them. So a stakeholders needs to be analyzed from the perspective of how that matrix of the stakeholders applies throughout the organization structure. So a matrix mapping is a technique of categorizing an organization's stakeholders by their influence according to two variables and plotting them on a 2x2 matrix. The y-axis, which is the oppose or support corporation, and the x-axis is the importance of the stakeholders. So that matrix allows managers to assess power of stakeholders to achieve their demands. Whether they have means or resources to influence, that will be to decide throughout the matrix structure. As an example, this is the position of important stakeholders matrix, and it reflects on the y-axis if it's a support and oppose with the two components, right, problematic and antagonistic, or the axis X, which is least, low priority, or most, which is a supporter. Similar to a net promoting score, a way when companies are trying to get an understanding about their products and resources, how do they deal with detractors and supporters? That is position on the issue or on the proposal accordingly. Stakeholders matrix mapping has 4 categories of stakeholders that can result from this analysis. There are problematic stakeholders, those who oppose the organization course of action, and they are relatively unimportant to the organizations. They are the one that they can be annihilated or they can cancel themselves throughout the reverse process of minimizing their importance. Antagonistic stakeholders, those who would oppose or be hostile to the organization course of action and are very important to the organization. And low priority stakeholders, those who support the organization course of action and are relatively unimportant to the organization. And obviously, we're talking about supporter stakeholders, those who would support the organization course of action and are important to the organization. After the entire categorization is been completed, the managers can develop tactics and strategy to most appropriately deal with each stakeholders. The diagnosis typology of organization stakeholders. So there are 2 assessments critical to enhance into any organization. The potential of the stakeholders to threaten the organization and their potential to cooperate with the organization. So the stakeholders can be classified as such in 4 types. Type 1, supporting stakeholders and strategy. Type 2, the marginal stakeholders and strategy. Type 3, the non-supportive stakeholders and strategy. And type 4, the mixed blessing stakeholders and strategy. The diagnostic typology of organization stakeholders. So stakeholders management process identify the key organization stakeholders by considering what are the factors that influence the stakeholders' behavior, such as the relative power, the specific context, and the history of relationship and the specific issues. That can happen into a workplace, and that can be dynamic and a dynamic environment depending on different activities within the organization. Diagnose the stakeholders according to critical dimensions of potential for threat or cooperation. Formula appropriate strategies to enhance or change current relationships with key stakeholders. And obviously implement strategies attempting to transform the stakeholders' relationship from less favorable to a more favorable one. So the stakeholder identification and salient. We are talking about salience as a degree to which managers give priority to competing stakeholders' claims. The stakeholders' identification and salient based upon stakeholders' possession of 1 or more 3 attributes. Power, obviously, a relationship among social actors in which one social actor, actor A, can get another social actor, actor B, to do something that B would not otherwise do. That is also a very unique representation in the workplace when you say, okay, I'm your manager and you do what I say. This is the approach of the power possession. Legitimacy, perception, or assumption that actions of an entity are desirable, proper, or appropriate. So legitimacy. Please let's on this bid and let's share the proposal with the municipality, with the governmental agency. This is the legitimacy and it's the right thing to do depending on the company or the corporation object of activity. And urgency, degree to which stakeholders claim or relationship calls for immediate attention. An example in this case is that we have to submit this proposal or the answer of the clarification questions by uh, end of the week. This is another way of providing an example for the urgency in this respect. As such, there are several classes of stakeholders, which are dormant, discretionary, and demanding stakeholders. Dominant, dangerous, or dependent stakeholders, and obviously definitive stakeholders. Enables managers to perform systemic categorization of stakeholders management relationship. Allows managers to deal with multiple stakeholders' influences. And in 1999, into his book, Stakeholders Influence Strategies, answers to the question, how do stakeholders try to act to influence the organization decision-making behavior? And that is reflected by resource dependency that exists when a stakeholder is supplying a resource and can exert some form of control over it. As such, we are talking about two general means of control over an organization: withholding strategies, as stakeholders discontinues providing a resource with intention of changing a certain behavior. Usage strategies, stakeholders continues to supply resources but specifies how it is to be used, with, as an example, the attached conditions. So the resources dependence also arises from relationships between stakeholders, influence pathway where withholding and usage strategies could be used by an ally of the stakeholders with whom the organization has a resource dependence. So we are talking about four influence strategies possibility, which is indirect usage, indirect withholding, direct withholding, and direct usage. Collaboration versus management. For stakeholders, collaboration that can be internal and external, can be one way or both ways. We are talking about collaboration as an established and a maintained relationship that allows organization to tap into powerful source of energy, ideas, and a wider network. Collaboration is a more integrated within the company-wide, and there is a responsibility for the stakeholder collaboration assigned to senior executives. As such, we are talking about the stakeholders, managers, fragmented among various departments, and this is a very good explanation within this table for each of the activity linked to short-term business goals or linked to long-term business goals, depending on the approach, whether we are talking about stakeholders management or stakeholders collaboration. Fostering a framework for organizations to develop collaborative stakeholders relationship involves 6 steps: creating a foundation, organizational alignment, strategy development, trust building, evaluation, and repeating the process as an ongoing activity. Two approaches to issues analysis: the issues management process, obviously, and the issues salient materiality analysis. The issue management process involves 6 steps: identification of issues, analysis of issues, ranking or prioritizing of issues, formulating issues response, implementing issues response, and monitoring and evaluating issue response. Issue materiality or sustainability materiality, it's a question or a matter that is sufficiently important to warrant management attention. An aspect or issue should be reported if it meets these criteria. Reflects the organization's significant economic, environmental, and social impacts. Substantively influence the assessments and decisions of the stakeholders. And that is a way to reflect, or this is an example of a matrix materiality table, whereas you can see on the y-axis, we talk about the importance of issues to the stakeholders involved, and on the axis X is the importance of issues to business, corporation, and management. Excuse me. Issues are plotted and ranked using order of importance. Priority issues for management would be right-hand corner. Next priority would be issues located in the upper left and lower right corner. Their influence on operations and the ease or difficulty of addressing the issues would be deciding factors for rating. Excuse me. Issues in the lower left corner are of little importance to stakeholders or to management. The appropriate identification of stakeholders is very important to business corporations as one approach to understanding the environment in which they operate. Freeman stakeholders management capabilities provides a good start point for understanding the stakeholder relationships. The various stakeholders matrix mapping methodologies give managers a practical approach to assessing the influence of the stakeholders. Diagnostic typology of organizational stakeholders attempts to understand the stakeholders' influence by assessing the potential threat or potential for cooperation. The salient stakeholders typology increases the complexity of analysis by using three attributes to assess the stakeholders' importance, and that is power, legitimacy, and urgency that we have discussed so far throughout the chapter 4. As such, the Fruman's influence strategies provide another perspective on understanding the stakeholders. He argues that managers should appreciate that stakeholders can influence one another and the corporation in direct and indirect ways by withholding or specifying usage conditions. Sophisticated approach to understand the stakeholders is through collaboration or engagement. Collaboration changes the approach from managing stakeholders to dialoguing with them, to bring them to the round table as to discuss what are the issues, what are the plans to overcome those issues. Issues materiality analysis has a logical connection to stakeholders analysis. Examining stakeholders and issues together increases management understanding of the environment in which the corporation operates. That was all from my end. Thank you and have a great day.